We're now moving on to our last session before lunch. We have our panel with us today. James, how did you get here yesterday? Yep.
Hi, got here by 2 flights.
2 flights? Where did you fly to?
Cardiff to Amsterdam.
Yep.
Amsterdam to Brussels.
Right.
Eventually.
And at the moment you are
I'm a tenant in South Wales.
Yeah.
And I'm also employed by the Housing Association.
And how easy was it to to become a tenant in South Wales?
My personal experience was very easy because my mother was a tenant before me, and when she went into care, it was transferred into my name.
Right, so you had succession.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your landlord, how do you find them as a landlord?
Yeah, they're a very good landlord. I can't...
The chief executive is sat here in the front row, by the way.
I was trying not into that, but no, RCT homes do quite a lot.
Yeah.
From my own personal experience of, they've got a social enterprise called Grow Enterprise Wales.
And what does it do?
It's I think the main aim of it is to try and get tenants the skills necessary to be employable within South Wales.
And what has been your experience of that?
My experience of this is I started volunteering start of the year in Grow. I was then called up to the main office in Pontypridd, and a couple of months of volunteering paid off into a apprenticeship job.
So what are you an apprentice in?
Learning and development.
And what does that involve?
Basically, it's booking courses for courses and conferences for staff to attend to increase their knowledge or to help them gain a better understanding in their field.
And how have you found that?
It's been really interesting. As you talk to more outside the business, you talk to other housing federations, and you do learn new things every day.
Tell us one thing you've learnt in your time as an apprentice.
Patience.
Only dealing with landlords, I know. Right. Okay, thank you very much. Magnus, would you like to introduce you? I know you don't need to introduce yourself to me, but for the audience on this occasion, could you introduce yourself, please?
Right, Phil. Phil is an old friend of mine. And I'm
I'm not old, by the way.
No, old. Well, he's a good old friend. Anyway, I'm Magnus Hammar, and I've been with the International Union of Tenants as Secretary-General now for almost 14 years. And I have my office in Stockholm, Sweden, and we're a membership-based organizations with members in 45 countries around the world. Almost 65 members. They are regional or national tenant associations. So in Australia, we have 6 or 7 associations, one for each state. And also in Canada, we have for different states and the US. And for like Switzerland, we have one for each of the language regions of Switzerland. This is all important. And all the tenant associations are very different. Some are very national. In Sweden, where I live, we have one single tenant association. But of course, in other countries, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different national organizations. And some are for social housing tenants mainly, and some are for all tenants. And I would say, okay, I think I'll finish there, and you can keep asking questions. Or yes, so we get to the topic. I'll finish there. Thank you.
So you've heard James talk a little bit about some of his experiences in Wales. Do you think this is similar to other countries, or that it's different elsewhere?
I came to think of a good example from Catalonia in Barcelona. I don't think we have any representative from Barcelona, or do we? Anyway, we have an organization called FABIC, and they actually are not a tenant association, it's a neighborhood association, and that involves the whole neighborhood, working with the residents in the neighborhood. So they have activities for the elderly, they have after-school activities, they have computer education for people in the neighborhood, etc., etc. And that also includes what I've heard here, that they provide opportunities to become skilled and to have an employment later on in this neighborhood. So this is something which is quite similar to what you describe.
Okay. And if you from the IUT were asked, what characterizes a sustainable and economic housing provider, what's the kind of things you'll be looking for from a good landlord?
Yes. Well, it's about reinvestment, I think. Owners, irrespective of their social or public or private owners, they're in it not to make money, but there is money made, and that some of that money has to be reinvested in the neighborhood together with the tenants. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think that's sort of a win-win situation, of course, and that's what we try to create. If the landlord sees, the tenants, the experience that the landlords, there is a trust from the landlord, and there is reinvestment going back to the tenants, and of course it's natural for the tenants to take better care of the owner's properties. That's a win-win situation. And if I know the owner, if I know that they are taking care of me well, and the rents are not going up like this every year, that creates a win-win situation, which is good for everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Sander, do you just want to explain who you are and where you're from, please?
Yes, okay. My name is Sander Scheurwater. I work for the RICS here in Brussels. The RICS is a global professional body with members working in land, property and construction. So we're sort of an international qualification mark, let's say. And I'm also very proud to have been on behalf of RICS on the ERHIN project, and it's great to see what 1.5 years of great work led by the organizations here have led to today.
And what do you think should be the role of housing providers in terms of supporting communities? Do you think they should be doing things like helping James get into jobs?
Of course, yes. I mean, I think I'm as the accent probably gives away, I'm from Holland, which has probably one of the most inclusive social housing systems, or at least it had so until the famous Dutch case came along. But basically, myself, speaking from personal experience, I've lived in social housing the first 20 years of my life, but I never knew I was living in social housing actually until I came here in Brussels. Not quite true. I mean, when I finished as a student, I moved to France to live with my then girlfriend and now wife, and there I found out personally what social housing can also be. I mean, that's not to talk bad about the French system or good about the Dutch or the other way around. It's just that systems are very different, I think. And if you talk about the participation of the private sector, those differences need to be taken into account. I think they have a crucial role to play. I think everybody does. I think studies show that it matters, but it maybe doesn't matter so much in which type of tenure you live in to get involved into your community. One of the most important factors is time. There are studies that say it can take up to 10 years before a person to get involved in the community, etc. I've lived in Brussels as a tenant for 7 years. I'm now living just outside of Brussels in a smaller town as an owner for 8 years, and I think I can fully subscribe to that. On average, people who buy are inclined to maybe stay a little bit longer, or have different ideas of what they want with their lives compared to tenants. It's a matter of choice. The non-for-profit sector, the social housing providers, it's in the name. They have the clear social role, so they should, whether it's in a democratic or less democratic way, always involve tenants fully. I think that the private housing sector, I think they also actually fulfill a social role. They provide housing. You have owners, owner occupiers. You have the private sector. You have the social sector. These shouldn't be seen separately, but as a good mix. Again, coming back to the Dutch case, I've seen myself with friends and family who actually got stuck in their social house and couldn't move up because the only other alternative was to own. And they either couldn't get the loan or they couldn't afford. So it's very important to have that sector as well. Obviously, they have a slightly different remit. They have a return. Yeah. They need to have a return on investment as well. So they need to be enticed to become part of this. Now, this can either be because they would want to and they would need more info. You can oblige them through law. You can incentivize them through tax rebates, etc. I had a discussion this morning with my colleague Peter Bolton King, who's sitting there, who works for the RICS in the UK, who gave me some numbers on the current UK situation, where there is a need to build over 200,000 homes a year, and where in 1997, I'm going to read this out, the social sector accounted for 23% of all households, and by 2019, it is projected that this will go down to 16%, while the private rented sector in 97 accounted for 9%, and by 2019 it's likely to reach 21%. So there is a clear role. I think public-private initiatives need to go on, and I think, okay, to maybe finish it off, how can they better get involved? I think we have this beautiful ERHIN project. We have a representative, although I can't see her now anymore, of UIPI here. I'm not saying it's one-on-one copyable to the private sector, but there you are. Get involved. You know, we're here. We can all talk to each other for the next Tenants Day. Get the private sector on the panels as well, and have that debate and show them your experience as well.
And we're going to be hearing a bit more about ERHIN for the rest of today. I can promise you all that. Sorry,
can I just say
quickly?
Thank you. No, I was saying that, and then normally, I mean, in the best of worlds, there's more communication I see between tenants in public housing, social housing, council housing with their landlords than there generally is between the private tenants and their landlords. Of course, there's a dialogue there, which is not always functioning with the private landlords. And when it comes to renovation, of course, this is a much more difficult situation. And I think we need to tackle that when it comes to what we're talking today about economic sustainability.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more contributions on the floor. John McPeak. John, do you want to just explain who you are and what do you do?
Yes, thank you. My name is John McPeak. I am a board member at Housing Europe, and amongst other things, I'm also a board member of the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations, and indeed on a large housing association based in Cardiff in Wales. But that's not my whole professional life. For more than 30 years, I worked as a housing professional for the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, and I retired from there in March as Chief Executive. I think it's fair to say that the United Kingdom has significant experience of this type of work. Housing associations in the UK, and not just in England, but Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, really see themselves as having two major roles. The first, you'll understand, it's a basic role to try and provide good quality or excellent housing services to their tenants. But the second role really reflects the fact that housing associations are social enterprises, not-for-profit companies, and they need to reinvest that profit for community good. So a lot of associations are actively involved in trying to improve the life chances of their tenants. And those types of schemes are often called community benefit schemes. But when I was training as a housing professional, we just simply referred to it as community investment or Housing Plus. And it's fair to say that whilst there are lots of very good examples in the UK, James's example is one, perhaps the best evaluation of this type of work has been done in England through the National Housing Federation. And that has shown that, for example, in 2011-12, English housing associations delivered about 9,000 community-based services to their tenants, and they helped about 8 million people through that type of work. And it's very interesting from my point of view, I think, that they've also shown that for every £2 of their own money that they invest in this work, they've been able to leverage an additional £1 from other sources. So it's been something that's produced an even bigger benefit than just through their own efforts. There's a lot of variety in the work. James has been a good example of one of the most common types. Associations are involved in trying to improve the employability of their tenants, create job opportunities, and allow people to take those opportunities up. But they're also working to help people out of poverty through money advice and things like that, improving knowledge and skills, dealing with antisocial behaviour, try and improve health and well-being. And there's a recognition, I think, in a lot of UK housing associations that if you invest now in dealing with prevention, you will actually reap significant benefits later on down the line by avoiding problems actually arising. And one final comment just on that, Phil, it strikes me that housing associations in the UK have managed to deliver these programmes through partnership working. And they work in partnership with central government, with local government, with the private and voluntary sectors, but I think most importantly, in partnership with their tenants. And that's where they get the very best bang for their buck.
Okay, thank you very much. And our last contributor is Brian Field. Brian, do you want to just stand up and say who you are and how much money you're going to give us?
Just put my pen down. Brian Field from the European Investment Bank. Just say a few words about the bank first of all, and then I'll speak about myself. The European Investment Bank is the lending arm of the European Union. It was created as part of the treaty. The shareholders are the member states of the EU, but it's not. We're not a European institution in the same way that the Commission is, in the same way that the European Court of Justice is. We're a quasi-independent. So I'm not a functionaire. I'm what is called an agent. I feel a bit like James Bond, but we're not for profit. We're not for profit, so that's important. But we're also not for loss, and that's pretty crucial, I think, to bear in mind. And I'm going to temper my comments around that proposition. Now, a little bit about myself. I joined the bank late in my career, after the age of 50. I've had extensive experience as an academic. I was professor of town planning at the National University of Singapore. I was the Dean of the Environment Faculty at De Montfort University. I still teach at University College London. I've also worked in the public sector for local authorities, housing policy in London Borough of Southwark, housing policy in the London Borough of Haringey, transport policy with Hertfordshire, and I've also worked in the private sector, Global Head of Planning and Economics for W.S. Atkins. So I cover the full spectrum. And so I've only come to banking late, so I don't start as one of these evil financiers. Having said that, there are two or three things that I'd like to pick up from the discussion, and I think it's important. What I always find, I mean, I used to attend these meetings years and years ago as someone who was working for housing associations and promoting tenants' rights and what have you. I'm now sort of looked at with caution by people who are attending these meetings. I'm concerned that sometimes people get offended by language which is actually quite specific and quite precise and is not supposed to be pejorative. The comment from Ona this morning about there has to be a business case. Well, I'm afraid there does. It's a fact of life. Sorry, I'm also an RICS member. I forgot to mention that. I'm afraid there does, but it's what we mean by the term business case. By the term business case, I don't think we necessarily mean that there has to be a profit. I don't think that we necessarily mean that this has to be, we have to be offering a generous rate of return to encourage investment. I think what we mean by a business case in the economic sense, and we're talking here about economic sustainability. I was also a professor of economics briefly, by the way, means that the benefits of a particular investment are sufficient or are greater than the costs of making that investment. That's what we mean by economic sustainability in the economic sense. It might be that financially the proposition is losing money because the external benefits as a consequence of the investment are not being recovered. But economic sustainability is what I mean by the business case. I don't mean the financial case. And so I think this was I mean, quite frankly, there's no money unless there's a business case. If you come to the European Investment Bank and you say you want to borrow money for this particular housing project, we will evaluate the project. We will look at it financially. We'll look at the rental returns and we'll look at what the repayments on the loan are. And if there is a shortfall, then we'll ask a very simple question. Who's going to pay for the shortfall? And that will be by way of subsidy. The subsidy might come from the local authority. If it's coming from the local authority, then we'll look at the local authority's accounts and we will say, you know, do you have the capacity to meet that shortfall? And is it worth your while? Are the external benefits sufficient to justify that? And will your voters continue to vote for you for that? If it's coming from the state, it's not such a problem because national politicians always make up the numbers anyway, so you can't take them seriously. The second panel, so that was in the first panel. The second panel, we talked about environmental sustainability. There was an implication that we were talking about convergence rents, although the term was never used. But there was a suggestion that it was in some sense immoral for private landlords to increase the rents of tenants after improving the properties. I don't know where that proposition comes from because the importance of the private rental sector is now going to be quite significant. The European social model is under pressure. Governments are cutting expenditure left, right and centre. Economic growth, which always got us out of a trap, is now at extraordinarily low levels, and most economists are saying the days of economic growth levels of 3 and 4% per annum are over, particularly if we're concerned about climate change and we're concerned about resource depletion and what have you. So we really do have to look at returns. And the idea that that it's an evil landlord who improves a property where he's got a tenant and endeavours to recover some of the costs from that tenant is in a sense an evil proposition. It's complete nonsense. Of course, the increase in rent has to be affordable. No one doubts that, and the sensible landlord will discuss the proposition with the tenant before embarking on the improvements. I'm talking about in the private rental sector.
Third point?
Sorry?
Your third point.
No, my third point is on good governance, relationships with stakeholders, etc., tenant democracy. In the current market, and this is linked to my final point on economic sustainability, in the current market, providing money, and the woman from Vienna Wohnen, or from Vienna, sorry, we lend a lot of money to Vienna Wohnen. At the moment, we can't even give them our money. The reality is, in the current environment, it's not a shortage of cash that's holding things back. It's a shortage of effective demand. It's a lack of ability from people who need the money to be able to borrow it because their creditworthiness isn't sufficient to justify giving them loans. Now, this is a real dilemma. And this is a difference between needs and effective demand. The needs, particularly in the housing sector, are astronomical. The effective demand, because governments have stepped aside, some municipalities have stepped aside, is not there. We have to do something to ratchet up the effective demand. And although I've made impassioned defence of the private sector, I also think that the public sector needs to do more and to stop stepping back from its responsibilities to people in housing need.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Brian. Magnus, and then a very short debate.
Well, I have to react on that, and I don't think that us within the IUT are against any renovations or increases if they are moderate and if they don't come sudden. I mean, if you're a homeowner, you save up money for putting on a new roof or new windows. Maybe you put money away for 20 years or 15 years, and then you can repair this roof. Often, unfortunately, what happens in Sweden now, where I can see, there is no long-term sort of investment or funding. We've had public housing in Sweden now. We had the Million Dwelling Program. That's 1 million dwellings from the 60s and 70s, which need renovation now. And unfortunately, these are they're owned by the municipalities all around Sweden. And they have spent a lot of those rents which the tenants have paid throughout the years. So now there's no funding. And as they are municipally owned, they put this money into swimming pools or roundabouts or roads instead in the community. So now they don't know how to fund this renovation. I think that's very unsustainable. And I think also that goes for many, unfortunately, landlords. They had to they increase the rents too sudden without having previously funded, put away money for future renovations.
Any other short contributions to this debate? This lady here, please.
My name is Leen Sweden. I'm a social tenant from Antwerp. It's a very interesting debate about benefits and costs. I not agree that we as social tenants have to pay the... je peux parler en français?
Yep.
Vous avez le temps de... Voilà. Bon, il y a pas mal de compagnies de logement social chez nous qui, pendant des années, n'ont pas eu une attitude responsable comme un bon père de famille vis-à-vis de leur patrimoine. Alors, nous trouvons comme locataires sociaux que ce n'est pas nous qui, à un moment donné, devons payer leur négligence. Parce que c'est un coût qui est trop élevé. Après 30 ans de négligence, le coût est trop cher pour les locataires sociaux de ce moment. Mais quand on parle de... Je suis d'ailleurs tout à fait d'accord avec le business case de ce matin, parce qu'il y a pas mal de locataires de logements sociaux, les associations, qui ne traitent même pas les locataires sociaux comme des clients. En Flandre, nous sommes des profiteurs d'abord. Donc, je serais déjà très content qu'on nous traite comme clients. Ça, c'est un début. Ce n'est pas le but, mais c'est le début. Quand on parle de bénéfices et de coûts, je trouve que quand on parle de rénovation, il y a un coût social que j'aimerais qu'on calcule, qu'on peut récupérer. Il y a pas mal de mes voisins dans des logements terriblement vieux, qui ont beaucoup de problèmes de santé. Qui peut nous calculer, après rénovation, quel est le bénéfice pour la sécurité sociale dans les soins de santé qui diminuent? Qui peut nous calculer, quand il y a des gens comme James qui ont leur travail, qui peut nous calculer le bénéfice de ceux qui travaillent et coopèrent à notre sécurité sociale? Ça, je trouve un aspect que je n'ai pas encore écouté. Merci.
Very impassioned contributions. Thank you very much. Those are really good. Any final contributions from the panel here? In that case, I'd like to thank all three of them. The two... Oh, right. One last question. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte Limousin, so I'm the coordinator of the ERHIN project. Okay, I will stand up, Barbara. I just wanted to react on two very quick points. First, just to answer to what was just said. We've seen during the project that there are actually a lot of research being done on how to measure what we call shared value, so shared benefits. So we've been discussing a lot about who will pay, who pays for the cost, are the costs too high? But we think that we definitely need to measure what is the benefits and who benefit from these investments, including in terms of avoided costs for health benefits, employment benefits, etc. So that was my first comment.
Yep.
Second comment, when we talk about economic sustainability, I think we also need to think not only about the sustainability of the system or the sustainability of the housing company, but we also need to think about the sustainability of the community, including in terms of economic growth, for example. And I think that housing providers and social housing providers are doing a lot also in terms of investing and working with local suppliers, with small suppliers, small companies. And I think that in the current context, it's also something that we need to consider and that we need to highlight and to think how we can maybe further contribute and further help small companies to develop their business in our communities. That was my last point.
Okay, thank you very much. My two words from this session have been communities and patience. I'd like to like you to ask me to. I'll start again, shall I? Would you join me in thanking the panel in the usual